Lovely day, Fred.
A lovely day it is.
Hey guys, Level Cap here, and today we're taking a look at We Happy Few. It's a dystopian first-person adventure game with a focus on stealth and melee combat. Development began after a successful Kickstarter campaign in 2015. The following year, it was released in early access on Steam and Xbox One Game Preview program. After some delays, the full game is finally out. I'd like to thank Machinima for providing me with a game code. Right off the bat, We Happy Few will probably remind players of BioShock. It's set in a dystopian, drug-riddled society and opens with the player having to make ambiguous but meaningful choices about their morality. Where BioShock has you choosing between saving or destroying innocent children for the sake of leveling up faster, We Happy Few asks you to take or refuse joy, a drug that keeps people oblivious to reality and makes blending in much easier. These similarities certainly aren't coincidental. Some of the developers had previously worked on BioShock 2 at Arcane Studios and mentioned BioShock as one of the inspirations for the game, and the similarities serve the game's story and world nicely. In the story, you play as Arthur Hastings, a government employee tasked with censoring newspapers. After coming across an article about Arthur and his brother Percy, Arthur starts remembering things from his childhood and then passes out. The game gives you the choice to down some joy or refuse it. In my playthrough, I didn't take the joy. However, regardless of what you choose, things quickly go south. One minute you're giving a cheerful piñata the old what for, only to realize it's actually a giant rat, followed by some cops chasing you into the sewers.
Got a downer here, haven't we? Put that down! I'll fix you!
Questions about morality, covering up your past sins, war, and poverty all come to bear on your choices as Arthur is forced into more and more difficult situations. In a nutshell, We Happy Few tells an alternate history version of the rise of Nazi Germany. It takes place in a fictitious British city called Wellington Wells, which is a bunch of islands connected by man-made bridges. In this alternate timeline, the Nazis rose to power much earlier. Their plans still didn't go very well, but as a result, they formed a second German empire and successfully captured Great Britain. A chemical weapons experiment was conducted during the occupation that went horribly wrong and forced the Wellingtons to commit horrible acts to survive. A hallucinogenic drug called Joy was invented to ease the public's pain, but its popularity transformed the city into a smiling dystopian nightmare. People that refuse to take Joy are thrown out into rural areas to fend for themselves or get killed trying to reintegrate into society. Arthur is one such person, and his story is full of tragedy. The more you play, the more of his backstory gets pieced together. Every character you come across has an interesting backstory that's slowly revealed the more you interact with them. Even NPCs like the police officers can have interesting conversations about the game's world. Much of Arthur's backstory is told by collecting masks scattered across various levels. Finding one plays an important moment from Arthur's childhood. The opening missions get you familiar with the game's various combat and crafting mechanics. Combat consists mostly of jabbing at people with blunt objects until you either knock them out or kill them. There are throwable items which serve mostly as distractions, but some can be used as deadly traps. As for crafting mechanics, you can make lockpicks, pry bars, and other consumable gadgets that let you unlock or open things. You can also craft specific outfits that help you blend in with various NPCs. Basically, anything you can use or equip is also craftable, including weapons. You can also level Arthur up with skills like better stealth abilities and more health. Once you eventually exit the sewers, the real game begins. You travel between pseudo-open world regions, completing quests, looting supplies, and interacting with various NPCs along the way. There are also other gameplay elements like basic hunger or thirst systems that limits your stamina. Deciding how much joy to take is a careful balancing act between overdosing or getting along with NPCs. These mechanics, however, feel more like they're intended to tie the story and gameplay together rather than serve as major roadblocks to success. Now, it's hard to review We Happy Few without addressing its shortcomings. The game was initially described as an open-world adventure game that would have multiple playable characters and procedurally generated regions to explore. As time went on, the developers narrowed their focus to one playable character and some static design elements in each region. They recently announced a season pass with 3 DLCs that all feature a unique playable character, but the changes still disappointed many backers and early access players. That being said, I think the reduced scale probably serves the game's story a bit better. In its current state, We Happy Few is very ambitious and basically achieves something similar to the original BioShock in terms of its scope. It's a big achievement for such a small studio. So while the combat lacks the depth of larger games, the world has enough scale and personality to make the story and characters feel authentic. It would be really hard to create an immersive story about a dystopian society if all you ever see of it are bits and pieces from a distance. We Happy Few has multiple large outdoor regions that you can explore. There's not a whole lot to do in most areas aside from looting and knocking out NPCs, but there's plenty to look at. The facade of a large dystopian society is on full display throughout the game. It just doesn't let you get behind the curtain very often. This can certainly lead to some of the lengthier combat sections feeling a bit tedious. You're often thrown into large areas with lots of enemies. There's plenty of space to explore, but the game rarely gives you enough objectives or combat options to make the gameplay in those areas particularly engaging. Level design elements often repeat themselves as well, making it difficult to tell some places apart. The cracks in the game's AI and combat systems are unfortunately really obvious. Running away from enemies confuses them to the point that you can basically see the game struggling to figure out what to do next. Enemies tend to ignore you, even when you're in plain view, and the stealth mechanics are very easy to abuse. Even in an army base full of guards, sneaking through bushes is almost trivial. A broader scope to the procedural generation would have likely exacerbated this feeling of emptiness and trivial combat. So it's probably good that development was scaled back to focus on a more constructed experience. And you'll really only run into this feeling of emptiness if you spend a lot of time off the beaten path hunting for supplies. If you spend a lot of time looting, your crafting supplies will always be full, but heavy looting generally takes you away from the game's main story. All of the game's most powerful weapons and gadgets are given to you as part of a quest, so it's rare that you'll find anything better in a locker or a toilet. You will, however, stumble across interesting environmental storytelling and side missions when looting, which makes up for the tedium in some ways. As for technical issues, the save system doesn't keep track of where you are, especially the manual saves. This prevents the dual purpose of preventing quick save abuse, but also makes completing missions without mistakes very tedious. It ties into the game's themes of memory loss and mistaken identity that gives it a unique charm, but it's still frustrating to reload outside the mission area over and over. Frame rate is also a bit of a problem. Indoor levels run reasonably well, even at high settings, but traveling outdoor tanks the FPS on pretty much all settings. As always, when it comes to PC hardware performance, your mileage will vary. Just know that even high-end systems tend to struggle to maintain 60 FPS in this game. The console version targets 30 frames per second, so you might not notice the frame drops quite so much. Despite all that, the world still feels lived in. The game's main draw really is the story and characters. While the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't particularly deep, the overall game itself is still very engaging and enjoyable. The dialogue and narrative in particular are really well executed. It has a unique identity in the dystopian adventure genre that's distinctly future retro with a British Clockwork Orange twist. And there are plenty of other games with similar mechanics and storytelling, but none of them achieve the same tone and styling of We Happy Few. This game really shines in the way that it uses various gameplay mechanics in more nuanced, story-driven ways. Crafting outfits to get past NPCs is a quirky and fun mechanic that gives purpose to an otherwise basic and repetitive system. The environmental puzzles are mechanically simple while still giving you a challenge, and despite how transparent the game's lacking AI can be, you're still engaged with the colorful characters that have a lot of personality, even if they are walking punching bags. Behind every challenge, mission, and puzzle is an interesting character or a bit of story that gives more depth and meaning to the events and actions that precede it. A character can seem like a deranged alcoholic only to be revealed as a caring man trying to move past the tragedies in his life. Anyone that's familiar with BioShock or Prey will certainly learn We Happy Few's mechanics right away. And like those other games, the real meat of the experience lies in the world you explore, not necessarily the heads you bash. While modern titles with bigger studios can offer more fleshed out and well-rounded experiences, We Happy Few strikes remarkably high for an indie game. That being said, $60 is a lot to ask. Considering it was $30 in early access and that $60 price tag doesn't include the planned DLC, it's a pretty tough sell. A big selling point of the game originally was the promise of a multi-character, fully procedurally generated open-world adventure. Over time, those features were either scaled back or turned into paid DLC. To make matters worse, $60 is generally a price tier reserved for high-end AAA titles like Wolfenstein 2, Far Cry 5, Doom, and Tomb Raider. High-quality indie games like Hellblade and Subnautica have proven that AAA quality is possible on an indie budget, but both are still $30 games. We Happy Few would be a fantastic value at $30. Its pre-order price will be around $50, which is nice, but a future discount would definitely be something to keep an eye out for. In conclusion, We Happy Few is an easy game to recommend for its fantastic story and characters, but that's where the bulk of its value lies. For $60, most people would expect a more polished gameplay experience. But if you can look past those problems, it's a charming game with a well-realized world and story. That wraps it up for today's game review. As always, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know in the comments what you think about this game if you've played it, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.
Are you a tourist? You're dressed like one.
Shit.
Slumming it, are we? Must be nice to have a closet.
Over here! Over here! You want to get thrashed?